Okay, now let's talk about supporting practices. The goal here is, as we've done in other sections, to identify the practices, evaluate the use in lessons, and then to have you reflect on your own use of these practices. So we're moving from this side to this side, right? So we have our modeling, we have our objectives, modeling, and practice, and now we're going to talk about the eliciting responses, providing feedback, and maintaining a brisk pace as the key supporting practices. So let's review briefly what it means to look at these pieces. So in terms of the first eliciting responses component of this, we want to maintain or check accuracy processing, match the learning outcome, match student abilities, match the desired response format, and maximize student involvement. I want to briefly review these points for you because there's a lot to this section of it. It's one of the most important components of this. You see here a number of different methods for eliciting responses. These are not the only ways to do it, but this is a set of them that we came up with to support you in doing that. Second, we want to make sure the method of responses matches the learning outcome. So if you have a knowledge level, remembering, or knowledge understanding level objective, then it's appropriate and important that you have questions and elicit responses in a way that's appropriate to the level of the learning outcome. Next, you want to make sure it matches student abilities. Think about what the students already know. Think about what they are knowing, Think about what they're learning as they're going through the lesson, and make sure that you're asking the right kind of question at the right sequence in the lesson. Remember not to ask questions students aren't ready to answer yet. And finally, think about how you're asking the question so you don't ask things like, does everybody get it, right? Because students are just going to say yes, okay? So does that make sense? Bad question. I shouldn't have said that, but I did anyway. Okay, you can see there, not a good example of phrasing purposefully. Next, the most efficient approach. Remember, you need to balance the number of students involved and the amount of time it takes to do this. We want to maximize the number of students involved and minimize the amount of time it takes given the appropriateness, given the type of task. So some types of learning outcomes require more time, and that might be appropriate, but you always want to be thinking about ways to get the maximum number of students involved. So the checklist for then providing feedback is to make sure that it's immediate and specific. The types of feedback should be affirmative, corrective, and as we called it, reset, sort of stopping students from giving off-topic response and getting back on track. We talked about some different ways to provide feedback, affirmative, corrective, and reset. And those are the things that we'll ask you to do when you do your lessons. Finally, for maintaining a brisk pace, you want to make sure that you move on when students are ready and use the other supporting practices to keep things moving. So now let's look at a lesson that uses these things. We're going to evaluate a lesson focused on syllables. In this case, it's a kindergarten small group lesson. The students are doing a syllable activity based on using manipulative to break a word into syllables. So now we're going to see the students break the word apart and blend the syllables together to form a word. So let's go ahead and watch this lesson, and we can talk about whether or not it meets our criteria. I'm going to disappear so you can watch the video. Here I go.
Ready? Okay, remember we've been talking about syllables, and syllables are parts of the word, okay? Okay. Remember, the words are broken down, so I want you to watch me. I'm going to say the word flower. Flower, okay? Now, can you say flower?
Flower.
Okay, now we're going to break flower apart. Flower. Okay, now watch. Are you watching? I'm going to blend it back together. Flower. Okay.
Flower.
Right, now let's read flower. Okay, now I'm going to let you try. Okay, so I'm going to give you the cards. I want you to line up the cards together. All right. Okay, so they're together. Ready? Mm-hmm. The word is monkey. Say monkey.
Monkey.
Okay, separate the word by syllable.
Monkey.
Okay, now blend it back together.
Monkey.
Okay, say turtle.
Turtle.
Okay, let's break it apart.
Turtle.
Okay, let's blend it back together.
Turtle.
Great job. Let's try apple.
Apple.
Okay, let's blend it back together.
Apple.
Good job. Let's try the word puppet. First syllable, pup.
Puppet.
Okay, blend it back together.
Puppet.
Okay, and let's try apple. Ready, go.
Apple.
No, wait, we're going too fast. Let's try again. First syllable,
Apple.
Second syllable, pull. Let's blend it back together.
Apple.
Okay, watch me. Apple. Apple. Let's try together. Ready? First syllable.
Apple.
Second syllable. Pull. Blended together.
Apple.
Good job. Okay, anything else?
So now let's talk about whether or not the teacher met the criteria in terms of eliciting frequent responses. Let's start by looking at our timestamps. In this case, the teacher elicited so many responses, we couldn't even list all of them. So here is just a sample of all of the responses that the teacher elicited. So that gives us a sense of whether or not it meets our criteria. So we're going to go ahead and say that it does meet our criteria of maintaining processing and checking accuracy of processing. In terms of the maintaining processing, we want students to be involved at least once per minute. And she's way over that level of response. Now, it's not entirely clear that she's able to check the accuracy of the processing, but it appears that she's targeting different students to look at, and so it's possible that she's able to check the accuracy of individual students' processing as they're going through. But that's not the only reason to elicit responses. It could be simply to maintain student processing so that they're able to stay in the lesson. And so having the students put the cards together, say the parts, put the cards together, that could be a way she's maintaining processing to make sure students continue to process the information. She may not at this point be fully checking accuracy, but she certainly has them very much involved. Now we'll talk about matching the learning outcome. Her learning outcome is to apply what they've learned about syllables, to break them apart and put them back together. She's asking them to use a manipulative to show how to do that. What's great is you can actually see the students do it. She says the word, the students say the word in parts, they put it back together. They're actually illustrating all the parts of the skill. It's not a difficult skill from our point of view, but for kindergarten kids, this is fully appropriate. And it's exciting to see that they're actually learning it. So it absolutely matches the teacher's learning outcome. As I just sort of illustrated, I think we could say that it matches student ability. They're continuously responding verbally, and although we can't hear everything that's going on, it seems that every student in that group is responding at the same time to her prompts. If we had one student that might have been a little bit slower to respond, it might indicate that it didn't match that specific student's ability. I can say overall, though, that it appears to match all the levels of the students in this group. So the teacher is doing a good job of matching the student ability. At least we can infer that. So then, does it match the desired response format? Again, we can say that it does. She wants the students to do things to show that they understand how syllables are divided and put back together. And she does that verbally because syllable division is primarily a verbal skill. And so it's important and excellent that she's focusing on that. She adds in the physical format here to give the students another way to illustrate their understanding of breaking things apart and putting them back together. It's also probably a good engagement strategy. What I like about that, though, is that because the focus should primarily be verbal, and it is, the teacher's physical response format is so simple that it's not going to distract attention from the verbal format. So moving the manipulatives allows the students to kind of see the idea of dividing and putting together, which is not taking a lot of time to make this all about the physical part of the activity. It's a great example of matching the desired response format as verbal, but incorporating physical as well. Now finally, does she maximize student involvement? I think we can just say yes. But again, to say it more clearly, teacher has 5 students in this group, and what we see is that every single one of the students is participating well more than once per minute. She's found ways to get all the students responding in that way. It's okay to take a little bit more time for the responses, but we saw that she didn't even have to do that in this case because of the type of the skill. In some cases, she might want to take a little bit more time for some things, but in this lesson, it seems fully appropriate. So we can say here that she does an excellent job of eliciting frequent responses. So let's talk about the feedback the teacher provided. Was it immediate and specific? In terms of immediate, I think we can absolutely say it was immediate. Every single time the students were asked to complete a task, the teacher always said something, whether it was simply good or okay. The teacher does acknowledge something immediately every time. But let's talk about specific. There's not a lot of indication that the teacher gives specific feedback. She says, good job. We know that that's not adequate for delivering feedback. It's important that the teacher does something more specific. Does she provide corrective feedback? She does find that the students are moving too fast. She slows it down, has the students try again. So she is then leading the students step by step back through the practice so that they'll know what to do. She's modeling again because she realized the students needed that level of support. So that is a good thing to see there. But because we didn't see the teacher making it very specific throughout the lesson, in fact, the lack of specific feedback may be a reason the students were moving too quickly. So overall, we're going to have to give that a circle. But what is great to see here is that the teacher does provide some of that reset feedback and then the corrective feedback to get students back on track. So that's great to see. Now let's talk about maintaining a brisk pace. First is the teacher move on when students are ready. We actually don't have evidence the teacher moves on. We have evidence the teacher stops. And that gives us a good sense of the teacher actually making a good decision about when to move on. The teacher actually is almost moving too quickly. Her pace initially is probably almost too brisk because she realizes students aren't with her entirely because they make the mistake on Apple at the end. So the teacher maintained a brisk pace, but she realized maybe the briskness was maintained at too brisk a pace, and she decided you need to slow things down because the students were not ready to move on. So it's a good example of the teacher maintaining a brisk pace eventually by figuring out the right pace for the students. It's not just about going fast, it's about going at a pace that the students will understand the content. And finally, using other supporting practices, well, she does. We know that because we just talked about the rest of them. So overall, in the lesson, the teacher does a good job of following all of the principles of supporting practices for the most part. And this is a great example of a lesson in which the teacher keeps students engaged and does it in a way that students are constantly active. We also notice that the way the teacher chose to do the lesson did result in the potential for students not completely understand it because the pace of the lesson was so fast, it may not have actually maximized students' learning of the actual expected outcome. It's a nice example of how you have to think about the balance between all the pieces of eliciting frequent responses, providing feedback, maintaining brisk pace, while making sure you're always meeting your intended learning outcome with your clear objective. So a nice example of how you have to put all those pieces together. And that's a perfect segue to the final piece of all of this work around supporting practices. So you want to figure out where in your instruction you most need to improve because you can't do everything at once. There are lots of different ways to focus on the supporting practice. In fact, within eliciting responses, there are 5 things you need to do to elicit responses effectively. You can't necessarily do all of those things at once. So you want to reflect on your instruction, increase the use of those practices, and then iteratively build the skills. Practice over and over, building up every part of your explicit instruction. And I still work on it. I still do lessons in classrooms. I still work with students. And when I do that, I always have to think about what's the skill I need to build most to keep students maximally engaged and to meet the learning outcome that I have for them. So for you, we're going to ask you to look back at a video. So first, you're just going to look back at the video you recorded for the last part of this because you're still going to have the supporting practices in the lesson you did before. And record where you actually use the supporting practices. What did you see when you did that part of the lesson? Did you actually use them? Were you following the elements of the checklist as you did it? So you can then identify with a video where you didn't even know we were going to focus on supporting practices, you can see whether or not you did that effectively. So it's a great way for you to think about what is it you need to build most in your own teaching. And so that's not all. So first, we're going to ask you to think about it. Think about how you can improve your practice by looking at a prior video of yourself. And then you can decide what is it you most need to improve on. And based on that self-reflection, you can create a plan for supporting practices that focuses on one of the elements of it. And it could even be you focus on one element within each of these. You might decide that you need to give more specific feedback, but you may not want to focus on the briskness of your pacing because you're not ready to focus on that or it's not the most important thing for you right now. You're going to use that information you got from your own self-reflection to make a decision about what to teach. So after you've kind of figured that out, you're going to plan the lesson based on what you've reflected on, and then you're going to execute that lesson with your students and use the plan you've written to teach for 10 minutes, focusing on those supporting practices, but always making sure you still are focusing on that learning outcome.